Annyeonghaseyo, ni hao, konnichiwa. Hello guys. So today I am going to do a review of the Tortured Willows collection, which is Bowed, Bent and Unbroken, and it is done by 4 incredible women. Now, my last attempt at this review went on for 30 minutes, and I love you all too much to put you through that. So after talking to my partner, I was like, I'm gonna have to do it again. And the problem is, there were so many incredibly good poems in this collection that I ended up just going off on one completely. Mainly because I absolutely hate bullies, I absolutely hate discrimination, I absolutely despise racism. So when I get off on one, I get off on one with a complete and utter vengeance. So guys, I'm going to try and do it again. And I'm going to try and do it as not as long as possible like I did. As you can see, I've got my kimono on, I've got my Chinese doll at the back, which is all the way from, I think it's from Hong Kong. My auntie Fran got it for me. I've got my Godzilla stuff. Hello, little Godzilla. And I am ready to rock and roll. So I'm going to try and make this one quick as possible. I think it's because of my love for Lee Murray that I just went off on one. I'm sorry, Lee. I love you too much. Anyway, so we started the collection with Lee Murray and her first story, which was, poem, Willows, which is based on Denise Glover's Magpies, which was a great start to the poetry collection because it gives you a feel for what you're going to expect, which is horror, discrimination, racism, degradation, poverty, famine. It's all in there. It's human horror more than anything. There is some supernatural horror in there where it goes into some of the ghost stories of Asian culture, but 90% of this book is talking about how Asian women have been put down horrifically over the years, varying from all different cultures. So we have Singapore, we have Japan, but I'm going to say Okinawan because the different entities, Malaysian and also Chinese, because Lee's Chinese New Zealand of descent. So we learn from Lee that there is a lot of a discrimination, and there's a lot of hatred almost in New Zealand towards Chinese people, and I think that's horrible. I mean, it's not just the hate seems to be an ongoing theme throughout this entire book. People hate what they don't understand, and I found this book enlightening and educational on so many levels. Lee's selection of poetry, it explores Chinese women migrating over to New Zealand for a new life, away from poverty, away from the darker side of Chinese culture. Unfortunately, it also shows there is a massive dislike for intercultural relations. In this case, Lee having a white father. So when Lee's father came into the picture and took away his mother, according to their family, Lee was then branded as horrible as it sounds, half-breed, and I hate that term, hate it. But the emotion in every single poem that she puts in definitely reflects the amount of solitude that she felt when she was growing up, especially when her parents, like her mom's family, were calling her father a white devil. That's going to leave some scars, especially if you are being constantly persecuted for not being one side or the other. It's heartbreaking. And especially for me, Cheongasam. Cheongasam is a poem about a dress that was handed down from her grandmother on her mother's side. It's a traditional garment of Chinese culture. The heartbreaking part was hearing how Lee felt so unworthy of wearing this garment. It was breaking me to pieces. I wanted to hug Lee. I still want to hug you, Lee. I honestly felt like she gave a piece of herself completely in every single poem that she wrote, when she was talking about how Chinese women were subjugated over in New Zealand. They were looking for a new life. Golden Mountains was a perfect example of how they thought that they were going over to New Zealand for this rich and glorious life away from poverty and famine, and they ended up getting the complete opposite. They ended up suffering the worst kind of poverty, the worst kind of discrimination and degradation and humiliation at some points. And it also enlightened me into how people feel so freely to make racist jokes, especially with the poem At the Bar. That one really peed me off. Like I say, I went off on the last video for about 5 minutes about how much I freaking hated and how annoyed I got that somebody had actually said this to Lee, this particular joke. I'm not going to say the joke because I'm against it. So you guys will have to read it to have a look at it in more detail. Then we move on to another incredible woman, Geneva Flynn. And Geneva is of Malaysian Australian descent. So we got a bit of a mix as such in terms of poetry form. So her collection mostly stemmed around different forms of poetry, including a particular Malaysian form called patum, which is basically a Malaysian poetry form that worked beautifully well with When Girls Began to Fall. It gave me an enlightened look into how Asian women are treated, essentially. I definitely feel like this subjugation of these women is horrible, but these women are definitely bringing to light the unsung voices of these victims, and I am 450% behind that. I definitely feel like Geneva was incredibly creative and opened my eyes to various different forms of poetry that I never thought about looking at, like blackout and figure poetry, where you make the shape of whatever you're doing and then you put the poetry inside it. There's also roundabout poetry, which is something I'd like to try at some point. I mean, she was incredibly creative with how she did her poetry form, but it also had this renownedly profound effect on you, especially with Guest of Honor. That one messed me up because you had 3 different poems in one. You had the girl side, the guest side, and then you combined the 2 and you got a horrible realization when you read it through in full. And I thought it was beautifully done. I definitely thought the morbid subject was handled well, especially considering it was cannibalism. Again, you guys need to read these. These are incredibly gifted poets. They know what they're doing, especially Mouth and Feet and Hands and Eyes. That one was a take on the Greek fates. And that I flipping loved, because it definitely highlighted how these women are forced to almost keep trying to meet the cultural standards at the expense of destroying themselves. I mean, there's foot binding and there's these ghost marriages that happen as well. I mean, ghost marriages freak the hell out of me, especially Bride Price. That highlights ghost marriages in more detail, where you would basically, if you were dishonouring your family, i.e. not get married, because of course that's the end all and be all, but in this culture it's important that you are a married woman or married man. I did feel like there was definitely, you could see how women were treated so badly compared to the men. So like if a Chinese man was unmarried when he died, then it just meant he didn't get married, like he didn't get buried in the family crypt, whereas the woman wouldn't get buried at all. And she would bring shame on her family for not marrying off to anybody that her family saw fit. The idea that you would be pushed into this practice, this very archaic practice in my opinion, but you know, every tradition is different, every culture has a different set of rules, and in this it was freaking terrifying. Not gonna lie, I definitely feel like the world opened up and swallowed me at one point, especially when I was exploring these practices in more detail. Rent a wife, I have to admit, Geneva, the bit where he's like, oh, feed me, and she goes, how about fuck off, was my response. So, love that one. You then move on to another gifted poet, Christina Sung. I'm going to say, I'm really, again, pronunciation's crap with me, so I'm trying my hardest, guys. I really hope you don't take offence. But Christina did Phoenix, which involves talking about servitude of Singapore women in the 1930s, and it's freaking horrifying to read, and it's harrowing in itself. I mean, I was messed up after reading that, I won't lie to you. There are some stories in there that definitely had me on the edge of my seat going, wait, what? One of them has to be Midnight Wait, which was for her grandmother. And yeah, I want to know what happened to Grandma after the end of the poem. Meow. I want a meow. I hope I'm saying that right, but I want a meow. I want to call a cat a meow. It's such a cute name for a cat in Cantonese. I was quite taken by that name. But this is it. Like, I learned so much about the sides of these different cultures that's both terrifying and also it's educational, because there is so many things I didn't know about. Headhunters is another poem that Christina does that terrifies me to my soul. I mean, the fact that there were people that were going out there kidnapping kids, chopping off their heads and sticking them in a bridge. Yes, that happened. That happened. These are real human beings doing this to kids. That's messed up. Flatface was not what I expected. Definitely the description of the ghost creature was terrifying. But at the same time, she almost came off as an avenging angel. And I like that, because a lot of these poems, when I was going through them, they had the same kind of theme that was going on through most of them, which was a lot of the husbands were bastards, excuse the French, but it seems like in this culture, women are the lesser person. They're not even people. They're treated like dogs. And the fact that men get away with so much abuse, and it's just like, it's fine. You're his wife, you're his property. Deal with it. I hated it. And the fact that these poor women stick by it, or face being shunned because of it, it's like, how dare you leave your husband for beating you? What? Well, anyway, so then we move on to this particular thing, which really struck home for me and made me want to read Black Crane. This is a quote from Black Crane. She was perfect, but was never perfect enough. And that was by Angela Yuriko Smith. Angela opened my eyes to some very different style of culture. Okinawan culture, to be more exact. And I had no idea that Japan and Okinawa were very different entities altogether. Okinawan culture is very devout to respect of the earth, respect of the dead, and worshipping the ancestors, and also respect for life. It's very spiritual there. From what she's introduced me into this world of spirituality that I never even knew existed. I mean, don't get me wrong, I know Japanese culture is quite proud, and there is a lot of talk about respecting the ancestors. They're very big on that over there, but I had no idea that there were these people called Yuta who had this incredible gift. Now, I learnt more about it as I went on with Onagami, a celebration of divine women. So over here in Western Europe, we were burning witches and we were killing anyone that said that they had any kind of spiritual kind of aspect to them. Over there, they were celebrated and were encouraged to take the practice on, and were almost pillars of the community in Okinawa, because they brought this beautiful practice into helping other people, especially in like the poem that I read, which was Kami-san, my Kami-san, which talks about a deity that helps the yuta, whether you're born or whether you're brought into it, to understand their gift and bring it further to the people and help them. The community itself was, I got this whole feeling that it was almost a family. They all protected one another. But on the other hand, I also learned that they were horribly discriminated against. So a lot of the parents of children that were brought up in Okinawa would never say that they were of Okinawan descent. They would say they were Japanese, because they wanted to avoid their kids getting discriminated and harassed for their heritage, which I think is bloody disgusting, because from what I'm learning about this incredible culture, there's no reason, no logical reason why these people should be discriminated against. I mean, it's a beautiful culture. The fact that these women, and it is mostly women that take the practice on, will look into the eyes and the abyss of the, beyond the veil is the practice. It can drive them mad, but they still take that risk because they believe that if they can come one with that spirituality, then they can become whole and they have a better understanding of themselves. It's incredible. I really got lost in her poetry, honestly, but I love Japanese culture anyway. But to learn about how different Okinawan culture was to Japanese culture was highly enlightening, and it was incredibly insightful for me as a person of Western culture that has no idea about a lot of Asian culture in itself. It also made me want to bring more awareness to the spirituality of Yuta. I actually have to ask Angela a very special question at some point, because I would really like to include a Yuta in my story, my next book, because I feel like they are very pinnacle in the discussion between life and death, and I definitely feel like I'm missing out by having such a crucial part of Asian culture. I definitely feel like I need more Asian characters in my book at some point. So I will definitely be speaking to the girls about that, because it's opened my eyes to a lot of things, like the inequality, the sexual harassment these poor women go through. It's just, the list goes on. It's horrible to imagine that these poor women have been downtrodden for so many years, and yet look at them. These 4 incredible women have come up with some incredible stuff. I had no idea that Lee Murray actually studied science. It fascinated me to learn how many traits she holds under her belt. It really was. And then to hear about Angela's backstory as well, the fact that she's took on her grandmother's name of Yuriko, and how much her culture means to her. You can tell she takes pride in it with every single syllable that she puts into her poetry. Christina definitely opened my eyes to the more sinister side of superstition, and Geneva opened my eyes to poetry I never thought could be brought forward. And it's all 4 women are incredibly talented. I definitely think you guys should check this book out. At least this one is 10 minutes less longer than the other one. But girls, thank you so much for honouring me by letting you, the honour of letting me read this work it's intense, and I really hope that I've got across the points that I never got to get across on my Goodreads and my Amazon, and I hope you know how much I respect you all. And I do absolutely 100% think I will be buying Black Crane, because if it's anything like this, I'm going to be blown away even more. So guys, there are 2 books you need to get: Black Crane and The Willows. You need to get these. You need to get them because they are incredible pieces of talented work. I definitely think you guys should check it out. I'm going to leave it there now, otherwise I'm going to ramble again, and you guys have had enough of that. So